Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about something from the early days of Warhammer again, and the possible return of some of the wackier characters from the early history of Games Workshop. Yes, it's another episode of my 40k history series, where I look back at some of the stranger things from the early history of the game, and where they are now, if they are here at all. And today's quite an exciting one, because we're looking at someone who has actually come back, and what this might mean for certain other characters in the lore. As some of you may know, recently GW has been issuing a new series of books, a little bit like the Horus Heresy series, to go along with the Era Indomitus, covering the crusade by Guilliman and the Imperial forces out from Terra into the universe after the birth of the Cicatrix Maledictum and the sundering of the galaxy. The second book in the series, The Gate of Bones by Andy Clark, has recently come out, and looking at the list of characters therein, we have one particular returning character, somebody called Ilian Nastase. In the book, Ilian Nastase is described as the herald of Eldrad Ulthran of the Ulthway craft world to Guilliman and an Eldar Farseer. But as you can probably tell by the fact I'm describing him in this video, he has a much longer and much more complicated history, which is why it's nice to see him back. To find out where he comes from, we have to go back to, and I keep picking on this year a lot, but it's 1988. Yes, in what is fast becoming my favourite seminal year for Games Workshop properties, and especially for Warhammer 40k, along came White Dwarf number 97. Within, there was a new Index Astartes, in fact the first of its kind, to describe yet another legion, and in this case it described the Ultramarines. And I say it like that because, in the original form, it's hyphenated. This wasn't Ultramarine in the style we're akin to today. The history of the chapter, described in the magazine, is really rather different to what we know today, and it's worth looking at briefly, just as again on this theme of the differences with early 40k. And they are described thus. Chapter Ultramarine of the Legiones Astartes was founded during the interlegionary wars of the 32nd millennium. Tradition places the date at 4001.001.m32, the very first day of the millennium. The chapter is therefore over 8,000 years old, making it a chapter of the third founding. Upon its inception, the Emperor gave the chapter the number 13, formerly the number of one of the Treacher legions now banished to the Eye of Terror without number and name and with all honours erased. Along with their number, the new chapter received the gene sperm, implant zygotes, rituals and other paraphernalia of indoctrination previously entrusted to the banished 13th Legion. The chapter's founder was Rebute Guilliman, whose bones now lie in the Reclusiam on Macragge. So already, some major differences from what we're used to. First of all, the Ultramarines aren't a first founding legion at all. They are one of the later, well, the third founding as it says, and their 13th legion status is given to them on the basis that that used to belong to one of the traitor legions. So clearly, in this era, we had, well, what we can only call Chaos Ultramarines, at least initially. We also get told about the fact that Rebute Guilliman, who again isn't named as a Primarch, and it's not really surprising because, as we know, and as I talked about in one of my previous videos, at this point in GW history there are no Primarchs. So Rebute Guilliman presumably was just a Marine, and well, he's dead. Sorry, Bobby G fanboys, but his bones are in the Reclusiam on Macragge, so he's definitely not coming back, Eldar trickery or otherwise. One of the other funny references here is to receiving the gene sperm. I think gene seed is somewhat a better name that is used today, but again, this just shows some of those differences from the early game. We're also introduced to some of the key characters of the Ultramarines, including Imperial Commander Marneus Calgar, everybody's favourite dual fist wielding chapter master of today. In fact, this is the origin of the really, well, rather hilarious picture of Marneus Calgar sort of sat on the toilet. You'll see it on your screen now with his dino desk. I mean, look at him. He looks like an absolute badass, but God knows what's going on with that dinosaur behind him, or the one that seems to be quite happy to be used as a writing desk. Now, I have heard word that these are supposed to be proto-Tyranids, but I'm not so sure. But either way, this is a brilliant bit of early 40k art. The description we're given of Calgar is also pretty good. We learn that he was an orphan rescued from a Tyranid hive fleet called Locust in the year 947 of M41, and he's now 44 years old because he was rescued at age 14. He passed all his tests to become a Space Marine with flying colours, and he rose through the ranks of the Ultramarines, becoming Master of the Household in 973 and Commander in 977, following the death of somebody called Deacon, the third Lord Macragge. He took a severe mauling in 976 and therefore has not taken part in any actions personally, which is quite funny when you think about the absolute beating that Abaddon gave him in the Vigilus books of 40k. Quite interestingly, he hasn't got power fists in this. No, he has bionic hands, which are in fact very complex devices incorporating a variety of weapons and other gadgetry, including Jacaro digital weapons, knives, lights, and a communicator. By the way, if anyone watching this doesn't know what a Jacaro is, I'm happy to do a video on them, but suffice to say they're really cool. They're basically orangutans in space. They're an alien race of sort of space orangutans with technological prowess who like to build miniature versions of everything and therefore make all the digital weapons. My favourite bit of the description of Calgar, though, is the little bit at the bottom where there is a single line that just says, "Calgar hates Tyranids," which I think is absolutely hilarious. We're also introduced to the master of the ships, Christo Columbine, who is supposedly a navigator who has been sold into slavery, bought by the Ultramarines, and therefore couldn't become a Space Marine because he was too old, and apparently therefore became a master of the ships because he's a navigator. It's a bit of a weird one, this guy, but apparently his heritage has left him spindly, and his hands and feet are large and webbed. It's fun, the details they give you in these early versions of the 40k lore. The index also gives us a rough overview of, well, I say rough, an exact overview of an Ultramarines day. My favourite points of this including the 0600 morning toilet, because apparently all Ultramarines poop at the same time, and the 2000 chaplain's cult recital followed by high tea, because I very much like the idea of the Ultramarines going out, having a big old chant and a religious ceremony, and then sitting down for some nice Earl Grey and cucumber sandwiches. It's all very British. We're also given an overview of the various ranks and the symbols used by the various ranks in the Ultramarines, and some of these are absolutely wild. I mean, they look very, very Eldar for a start. You've also got a reference, if you look to the top right, to the Mindwing Sergeant. The Mindwing. That sounds like a Dark Angels version of the Librarius. So again, you can see how early on things just aren't as we know them today, and they're still working on the lore. More importantly on this, if you look in the second row, just second from the right, you'll see the subject, well, nominally the subject of this video, Astropath Ilian Nastase. And this is where things get quite interesting. So, back in 1988, there was no Tigurius, no current chief librarian of the Ultramarines. Instead, we are given, yes, that's right, Ilian Nastase, that same Eldar Farseer that we talked about in the beginning from the Gate of Bones. Except back in 1988, Ilian was not Eldar, or at least not wholly. He's described as being born to a human mother on the world of Badab, following the expulsion of the tyrant there in 912 of M41, and his father was an unknown Eldar mercenary. He was gene tested at birth in accordance with Imperial law and taken into custody, which is interesting because most of the time, when it comes to sort of mutants or people they don't like, the Imperium just shoots them these days. He was reared in a government compound by the Imperial mission, which took over the running of Badab after the war. He then goes on an absolutely wild journey. So he goes to Earth in 924, gets soul-bound to the Emperor, and is then recruited into the Administratum as an astropath. He rises through the ranks of his role, eventually becoming the consul and helping to run the Adeptus Terra's advisory senate to the master of the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, whatever that means. He then ends up doing 4 years with the fleet, presumably the Imperial Navy, a further 2 years with the Dark Angels, because we all know they love outsiders, and was then appointed as chief of the Macragge Interstellar Communications Link under the Ultramarines. He's now 76 and is the chief librarian astropath of the Ultramarines. So this is a real alternative to what we have today. It shows an Imperium which is much more tolerant of what they would consider Xenos half-breeds than they certainly are today. And not only are they tolerant of them just existing, they allow them to hold position and rank both on Terra and in a Space Marine chapter. It's also worth quickly noting that Ilian Nastase, the 40k character, shares a name with Ilian Nastase, a Romanian tennis star of the 1970s and somewhat controversial figure in the world of sports who has been involved in some interesting behaviour. I'll let you look that one up for yourselves. Quite what the link is between a controversial tennis player and a half-human, half-Eldar astropath librarian, I don't know, but again, someone in the GW in the 1980s clearly decided that it was a good name that they were going to use. So what I really like about this is, again, it just shows the much more open, much more, when I say open, I mean the much more sort of free-flowing lore from those early days of 40k. And I love the fact that Andy Clark has resurrected this character in a more, shall we say, codex-compliant way by having him as a Farseer. But this prompts my next question. Who else could they bring back? Now, there is someone I was going to talk about here, but I'm actually going to do a separate video on him, which is the first Inquisitor, and the best Inquisitor of all time. Is there anyone you've read about in the old 40k lore, or even anyone more recent that appears to have either disappeared or died or has just dropped off, which you'd like to see resurrected? Let me know in the comments below, because I'd be really keen to hear your thoughts. So that is a quick look at some of the early history of the Ultramarines and early characters who are coming back into the lore, even though they are in somewhat different forms. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe below. Hell, if you didn't enjoy it, dislike, comment, it's all good for me. Because I'd love to make more content, and I'd like to make content that you guys want to watch and listen to. So until next time, I've been ADRWargaming, and happy hobbying.